A black baby boy was handed over at birth to strangers because his white parents didn't like what they saw. 26 years later, he's a millionaire. What he finds in that Walmart parking lot will break your heart. Comment where you're watching from and ask yourself, could you forgive them? Take a breath and enjoy the story. Lucas Sherman's hands trembled as he held the weathered envelope, postmarked from a town he'd sworn never to think about again. The return address was barely legible, written in shaky handwriting that spoke of age and desperation. After 26 years of silence, they had found him. The morning had started like any other in his successful construction company office. Coffee steamed on his mahogany desk, blueprints scattered across the surface, and his assistant had just confirmed 3 new housing contracts. At 36, Lucas had built more than homes. He'd constructed a life that most people envied. A thriving business, a beautiful wife, 2 children who adored him, and a reputation in Chicago that opened doors wherever he went. But the letter in his hands threatened to tear down everything he'd carefully built. "Dear son," it began, and Lucas nearly threw it away right there. The audacity of that word, son, after what they'd done. After how they'd looked at him in that hospital room 26 years ago, their faces twisted with shock and disgust when the nurse placed him, a dark-skinned newborn, into their expectant white arms. He forced himself to continue reading. "We know we have no right to contact you after all these years. We know what we did was unforgivable. But we're desperate, and you're the only family we have left." Family. The word burned in his throat like acid. Lucas walked to his office window, 30 floors above the bustling Chicago streets, and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Below, people moved like ants, each carrying their own burdens, their own secrets. How many of them had been rejected by the very people who were supposed to love them unconditionally? The letter continued in that same shaky handwriting. "We lost everything in the fire last month. The insurance company won't pay because of a technicality we don't understand. We're living in our car now, and winter is coming. I have diabetes, and your mother has been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. We don't have anyone else to turn to." Lucas crumpled the letter in his fist, then smoothed it out again. His adoptive parents, the Bakers, had given him love, opportunity, and the foundation to become the man he was today. They'd found him in the foster system when he was 3 years old, and never once made him feel like anything other than their beloved son. They were his real parents in every way that mattered. But these people, Rodney and Rita Soto, they had created him. They had felt him move in the womb, prepared a nursery, chosen his name. And then, in one moment of shock and ignorance, they had thrown it all away because their baby didn't look like what they expected. The memory that haunted him most wasn't even his own. It was the story his social worker had told him years later, when he was old enough to understand. How Rita Soto had sobbed for hours after the adoption papers were signed. How Rodney had paced the hospital corridors like a caged animal. How they'd asked 3 different nurses if there had been some kind of mistake. But they never changed their minds. They went home to their prepared nursery and closed the door on the son they couldn't accept. Lucas's phone buzzed. A text from his wife, Dorothy. "Don't forget dinner with the Bakers tonight. Mom's making your favorite pot roast." His adoptive mother, Nadia Baker, had never once asked about his biological parents. She'd simply loved him fiercely and completely, as if he'd been born directly from her heart instead of her womb. She'd been there for every scraped knee, every school play, every triumph and heartbreak. She'd taught him that family wasn't about blood. It was about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. So why was his hand reaching for the phone to call the number at the bottom of the letter? He set the phone down and read the letter again, more slowly this time. Between the lines of desperation, he could see the truth they weren't saying. They were dying. Not just literally, though that seemed to be happening too, but dying from the weight of their regret. 26 years of wondering about the son they'd given away, 26 years of living with a choice that had probably haunted every Christmas morning, every birthday, every quiet moment when they were alone with their thoughts. Lucas had built houses for hundreds of families, had seen the joy in parents' eyes when they handed over the keys to a home where they'd raise their children. He understood better than most what a home meant. It was security, love, belonging. Everything he'd been denied as a newborn. The irony wasn't lost on him that the very people who had rejected him were now homeless themselves. His office door opened, and his assistant, Angela, peeked in. "Mr. Sherman, your 2 o'clock appointment is here." "Cancel it," Lucas said without turning around. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." Angela's eyebrows raised in surprise. In 5 years of working for him, she'd never known Lucas to cancel appointments. "Is everything okay?" Lucas finally turned from the window, the letter still clutched in his hand. "I need to make a trip. Tonight. Can you book me a flight to Millbrook, Tennessee?" "Of course. But, and Angela?" Lucas's voice was steady, but something in his eyes made her step closer. "If anyone asks where I've gone, tell them I'm visiting family." As the office door closed behind her, Lucas sat back down at his desk and pulled out a legal pad. He began writing a list, not of construction materials or project timelines, but of questions. Questions he'd carried for 26 years, questions that had shaped every decision he'd made, every relationship he'd built, every wall he'd constructed around his heart. Tomorrow, he would finally get his answers. But first, he had to decide. Was he going to Tennessee as Lucas Sherman, the successful businessman seeking closure? Or was he going as the baby boy who had been rejected before he'd even had a chance to take his first breath outside the hospital? As he reached for his phone to call Dorothy and explain why he'd be missing dinner with the parents who had never let him down, Lucas realized that after 26 years of running from his past, he was finally ready to face it. What he wasn't prepared for was how much it would change everything he thought he knew about love, family, and forgiveness. The flight to Nashville felt like traveling backward through time. With each mile that passed beneath the plane's wings, Lucas felt himself shedding layers of the successful businessman he'd become, revealing the wounded child he'd worked so hard to bury. The rental car GPS guided him through increasingly rural roads until he reached Millbrook, Tennessee, a town that looked like it had been forgotten by progress itself. Main Street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with empty storefronts and buildings that had seen better decades. The pharmacy had a for-lease sign that looked sun-faded enough to be permanent. The local diner's parking lot held more weeds than cars. This was where Rodney and Rita Soto had lived for the past 26 years, in a place that seemed to mirror their own decline. Lucas parked outside what used to be Soto's hardware store, according to the peeling letters on the storefront window. Through the dusty glass, he could see empty shelves and a cash register covered with a sheet. The business they'd built their life around was as dead as their dreams of a white family in a white town. He'd done his research during the flight. A few phone calls to local contacts, some internet searches, and the story had become clear. The Sotos had never had other children. Rodney's hardware store had struggled for years before finally closing. They'd been living off savings and Social Security, getting by in their small house on Maple Street until the electrical fire that had started in their old wiring and consumed everything they owned. Now, according to his GPS, he was 3 blocks away from finding them living in their car. Lucas had imagined this moment countless times over the years, but he'd always pictured confronting them from a position of strength, in their comfortable home, surrounded by the life they'd chosen over him. He hadn't expected to find them as broken as he'd once been. The address led him to a 24-hour Walmart parking lot on the outskirts of town. It took him 10 minutes of walking through rows of cars and RVs to find them. The 1998 Honda Civic was parked in the far corner, away from the lights, trying to be invisible. Even from a distance, he could see clothes hanging from the windows and a small camping stove set up on the trunk. His heart hammered against his ribs as he approached. 26 years of anger, hurt, and questions were about to collide with reality. The woman sitting in the passenger seat looked up first. Rita Soto had been beautiful once. He could see it in the bone structure of her face, the way she held her shoulders. But poverty and regret had carved deep lines around her eyes. Her hair, completely gray now, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was trying to organize papers in a shoebox, and Lucas realized she was probably sorting through insurance documents, medical bills, the paperwork of disaster. She saw him approaching and tensed, probably thinking he was security coming to move them along. Then their eyes met through the windshield, and everything stopped. Lucas had inherited his height and his hands from Rodney, but his eyes, those came from Rita. They were the same unusual shade of green-brown, the same shape, even the same way of widening when surprised. In that moment, despite everything, genetics announced itself with undeniable clarity. Rita's hand flew to her mouth, and the shoebox scattered papers across her lap. She shook the man sleeping in the driver's seat, Rodney, and when he woke and saw Lucas standing there, the resemblance was even more striking. Rodney had passed down his jawline, his broad shoulders, and the way he ran his hand through his hair when nervous. For a full minute, no one moved. They stared at each other through the car windows like exhibits in a museum, studying features they recognized in their own faces. Finally, Lucas knocked on the window. Rodney rolled it down with shaking hands. "Lucas?" His voice was hoarse, uncertain. "Yeah." The word came out harder than Lucas had intended. "I got your letter." Rita started crying immediately. Not the dramatic sobs of grief, but the quiet, steady tears of someone who had been holding back emotion for so long that it had worn a permanent channel down her cheeks. "You came," she whispered. "I can't believe you actually came." "I'm not sure why I did," Lucas said honestly. He looked around the parking lot, at the other cars and RVs that housed people who had nowhere else to go. "How long have you been living like this?" 6 weeks, Rodney answered. "Since the fire. The insurance company says the policy lapsed because we missed a payment by 3 days. 3 days, after 30 years of payments." His voice carried the bewilderment of someone who discovered that the world didn't operate by the rules he'd believed in. Lucas studied his biological father. Rodney Soto had worked with his hands his entire life. It showed in the calluses, the slight stoop of his shoulders, the way his fingers were permanently stained with old grease and paint. He looked like someone who'd spent his life fixing things for other people, but couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. "The letter said Rita has dementia," Lucas said, and immediately regretted how clinical he sounded. "Early stages," Rodney confirmed. "Some days are better than others. Yesterday she forgot we lost the house and kept asking when we were going home." He glanced at his wife with the kind of tenderness that comes from decades of marriage. "Today's a good day. She knows who you are." Rita reached through the window toward Lucas, then stopped herself. "You're so tall," she said wonderingly, "and successful. We've followed your company online. We know about your family, your business. We're so proud of what you've become." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. Proud? The anger he'd been holding back for 26 years finally erupted. "You're proud? You gave me away before I was 24 hours old because I didn't look like what you ordered. You don't get to be proud." Rodney flinched as if he'd been slapped. We know what we did was unforgivable. We were young and stupid and scared, and we made the worst mistake 2 people could make." "A mistake?" Lucas's voice rose, and other people in the parking lot began to stare. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or buying the wrong size shirt. What you did was abandon your child because of the color of his skin." "You're right," Rita said quietly. "It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A terrible, racist, inexcusable choice that we've regretted every single day since." The simple honesty of her admission took some of the wind out of Lucas's anger. He'd expected denials, excuses, explanations about how different things were in 1987. He hadn't expected complete accountability. "Why now?" he asked. "Why reach out to me now? Because you need something?" Rodney and Rita exchanged a look that held decades of conversation. "Because we're running out of time," Rodney said simply. "I have diabetes that's getting worse every year. Rita's mind is slipping away piece by piece, And because every night for 26 years, we've gone to bed wondering about the son we threw away. We know we don't deserve forgiveness. We know we don't deserve anything from you. But we had to try. We had to tell you that giving you up was the worst thing we ever did, and not a day has passed that we haven't thought about you. Lucas looked at these two broken people living in a car in a Walmart parking lot, and for the first time, he saw them not as the monsters from his nightmares, but as human beings who had made a catastrophic choice and spent their lives paying for it. "I need time to think," he said finally. "I don't know what I need." "We understand," Rita said. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving us the chance to see the man you became. That's more than we deserved." As Lucas walked back to his rental car, he could feel their eyes following him. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the Walmart sign, trying to process what he'd just experienced. These weren't the villains he'd imagined. They were just people, flawed, regretful people who had destroyed their own lives as much as they'd affected his. His phone rang. Dorothy's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," he answered, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Lucas, you sound awful. How did it go?" He looked back at the Honda Civic, where he could see Rodney and Rita sitting in the darkness, probably trying to figure out how to sleep in bucket seats for another night. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I really don't know." But as he drove back to his hotel, one thought kept echoing in his mind. What if forgiveness wasn't about what they deserved, but about what kind of man he wanted to be? Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hotel room chair, staring out at the empty streets of Millbrook, replaying every moment of the encounter. At 3 a.m., he finally called the one person who would understand. "Lucas? Baby, what's wrong?" Nadia Baker's voice was thick with sleep, but instantly alert with maternal concern. "Mom, I'm sorry to wake you. I'm in Tennessee. I found them." There was a long pause. Nadia Baker had always known this day might come. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I don't know." Lucas's voice cracked like it hadn't since he was 12. "They're living in their car, Mom. They lost everything, and they're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Lucas had to think about that. Monsters, I guess. People who could throw away a baby and sleep well at night. But they're just broken. They've been broken for 26 years, and I think it's because of what they did to me. Nadia's sigh carried decades of wisdom. "Oh, honey, I knew this was going to be hard. Did you ever hate them? For what they did?" Another pause. "No, baby. I was grateful to them." "Grateful?" Lucas couldn't hide his shock. "They gave me you. Their loss was my greatest blessing. I got to raise the most wonderful son a mother could ask for." Her voice grew gentle. "But Lucas, I also felt sorry for them. Because they missed out on knowing you. They missed your first steps, your first word, your graduation, your wedding. They missed watching you become the incredible man you are. That's a punishment worse than anything I could have wished on them." Lucas felt tears burning his eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mom." "What does your heart tell you to do?" "My heart is all mixed up. Part of me wants to help them because nobody should live like that. But part of me thinks they deserve exactly what they got." "Those feelings can both be true at the same time," Nadia said softly. "Being a good person doesn't mean you have to stop feeling hurt. It means you don't let the hurt make your decisions for you." After hanging up, Lucas finally fell asleep just as the sun was rising. He woke at noon with a plan that both terrified and excited him. He drove back to the Walmart, but the Honda Civic was gone. Panic shot through him. Had they left town? Had his confrontation driven them away? He spent an hour driving through Millbrook's streets before he spotted the car parked behind the public library. Rodney was inside the library, hunched over a computer terminal, slowly typing with 2 fingers. Through the window, Lucas could see Rita sitting in the car, staring at nothing with the distant look he now recognized as her dementia symptoms. Lucas entered the library and sat down at the computer next to Rodney. His biological father looked up, startled. "I've been looking at your company website. Rodney said quietly. Sherman Construction. You've built some beautiful homes. Yeah, I have. Lucas pulled up his own website on the adjacent computer. This one's my favorite. He clicked on a photo gallery showing a modest 3-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and a garden. I built it for a family whose daughter had cerebral palsy. They needed everything on one level, with wide doorways and a ramp. The parents cried when I handed them the keys. Rodney studied the photos. You do good work. Quality craftsmanship. I learned from the best. My dad, my adoptive dad, he was a carpenter. Taught me that a house isn't just shelter. It's where people make memories, where they feel safe, where they belong. The word belong hung in the air between them. Lucas, Rodney said slowly, I need you to know something. The reason we gave you up. It wasn't just racism, though. That was part of it. We were 22 years old, living in this town where everybody looked the same and thought the same. We'd never even met a black person, let alone raised a black child. We were terrified we'd do it wrong, that we'd mess you up worse than if we gave you to a family who could give you what you needed. Lucas felt a familiar anger rising. So you decided for me. You decided I was better off without you. We were cowards, Rodney admitted. And we were wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About what family means. About what love looks like. He gestured toward the car where Rita sat. We spent 26 years in this town, and you know what we learned? Being the same color as everyone else doesn't make you family. We were never really part of this community. We were just existing. Lucas followed Rodney's gaze. Tell me about Rita, before the dementia. Rodney's face softened. She was a teacher, elementary school. She loved those kids like they were her own. Every Christmas, she'd spend her own money buying presents for the ones whose families couldn't afford them. She'd stay after school to help the slow readers, pack lunches for the ones who came hungry. His voice broke slightly. She would have been an amazing mother to you. But she wasn't, Lucas said simply. No, she wasn't. And that broke something in her that never healed. She quit teaching after 3 years, because being around children made her think about you constantly. She'd see a little boy with dark hair and wonder if that's what you looked like. She'd hear about kids getting adopted and wonder if you were happy, if your new parents loved you enough. Lucas watched Rita through the window. She was looking around the car as if she didn't recognize where she was. The dementia. How bad is it? Some days she's completely herself. Other days she thinks you're still a baby and asks when we're bringing you home from the hospital. Those are the hardest days, because I have to tell her all over again what we did. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of decades settling between them. I called my wife last night, Lucas said finally. Told her about you two. She thinks I should help you. Rodney's head snapped up. We're not asking for... I know what you're asking for. You want forgiveness. You want to feel less guilty about the choice you made. Lucas turned to face him fully. But here's the thing. I'm not sure I can give you that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Rodney nodded, his face falling. But, Lucas continued, I can give you something else. I can give you a chance to see who your son became. I can let you be part of my life if you want that. Not as parents. You lost that right. But as... I don't know what to call it yet. You'd do that after everything? My mom, my real mom, Nadia Baker, she taught me that holding on to anger is like carrying a heavy bag everywhere you go. Eventually your arms get tired. Lucas pulled out his phone and showed Rodney a photo of his own children. These are your grandchildren, biologically speaking. Clarice is 8 and Todd is 5. They don't know about you yet, but if you prove you've really changed, if you can be the people you claim you want to be, maybe someday they will. Rodney stared at the photo with wonder and heartbreak. They're beautiful. They are. And they're being raised to see people as people, not colors. They're being raised to understand that family is about love and choice and commitment. Lucas put his phone away. If you want a relationship with me, with them, you have to prove you understand that now. How? Rodney asked desperately. How do we prove that? Lucas looked out at Rita, then back at Rodney. I'm going to make you an offer. I'm going to build you a house. Rodney's mouth fell open. What? A small house, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, accessible design for Rita's condition. But it'll be yours, free and clear. No mortgage, no rent. A place to live with dignity for whatever time you have left. We can't accept that. We can't pay. I'm not doing it for you, Lucas said firmly. I'm doing it for me. Because the man I want to be doesn't let elderly people live in cars, even if they hurt him. Because my children are going to ask me someday what I did when I found people in need, and I want to be able to tell them I helped. Rodney was crying now, tears streaming down his weathered face. Why? After what we did to you, why would you do this? Lucas stood up and looked out at Rita one more time. Because someone once took in a 3-year-old boy that nobody wanted and gave him everything. Because I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose love when you have every reason to choose hate. He started walking toward the door, then turned back. But there's a condition. While I'm building your house, you're going to help. You're going to work alongside me and we're going to talk. About everything. About what you did, about who I became, about what it means to be family. And if at any point I decide you haven't really changed, if I think you're just grateful instead of truly sorry, I'll walk away and you'll never see me again. Rodney wiped his eyes and stood up straight. For the first time since Lucas had met him, he looked like a man instead of a broken soul. When do we start? As Lucas walked toward his rental car, he felt something shift inside his chest. The anger was still there, but it felt different now, cleaner, more focused. He wasn't forgetting what they'd done, but he was choosing what came next. He had no idea that his decision to build them a house would uncover a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about that day in 1987. 2 weeks later, Lucas stood on a half-acre lot on the outskirts of Millbrook, watching Rodney struggle to carry a bundle of 2x4s that would have been easy work for him 30 years ago. The land had been cheap. Nobody wanted to build in a dying town. But it had good drainage and faced east, perfect for morning sun in the kitchen. Working alongside Rodney had been stranger than Lucas expected. Despite everything between them, they shared the same methodical approach to construction, the same instinct for measuring twice and cutting once. Genetics, it seemed, extended beyond eye color into the way they both unconsciously checked corners with their thumb and the careful way they set nails. Take a break, Lucas called out as Rodney paused to catch his breath. You're not 25 anymore. Neither are you, Rodney shot back, but he was smiling. It was the first smile Lucas had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. For a moment, Lucas could see what Rita had fallen in love with all those years ago. They'd been having these conversations while they worked, careful at first, circling around the painful subjects like animals testing dangerous ground. But gradually, the rhythm of shared labor had loosened something between them. Rodney had started talking about his father, who'd run the hardware store before him, and how he'd grown up believing that staying in Millbrook and taking over the family business was the only path available to him. I never left this town for more than a week until we went to Nashville for you to be born, Rodney had admitted while they poured the foundation. Can you imagine? 22 years old and I'd never been more than 50 miles from where I was born. I thought the whole world worked like Millbrook. Lucas had listened while measuring rebar spacing, trying to understand how someone could live in such a small bubble. His adoptive parents had taken him everywhere. Museums in Chicago, camping in Wisconsin, a memorable trip to Washington, D.C. when he was 10. The idea of never leaving your hometown seemed as foreign as never leaving your house. But today felt different. Rita was having a bad day. She'd woken up confused and agitated, asking Rodney repeatedly when they were going to bring the baby home from the hospital. Rodney had been quiet all morning, and Lucas could see the pain etched in every line of his face. How do you handle it? Lucas asked, as they took their lunch break in the shade of the framing. The dementia, watching her slip away. Rodney unwrapped a gas station sandwich and stared at it like he'd forgotten how to eat. Some days I think it's a mercy. The guilt was eating her alive, Lucas. For 26 years, she carried that weight. Now, on her bad days, she doesn't remember what we did. She just remembers wanting a baby. And on her good days? On her good days, she asks me if I think you'll ever forgive us. Rodney looked up at Lucas. What should I tell her? Lucas hammered a nail with more force than necessary. I don't know yet. They worked in silence for a while, the afternoon heat making everything shimmer. Lucas was positioning a header beam when Rodney suddenly stopped what he was doing. There's something I need to tell you, Rodney said quietly. About the day you were born. About why we really gave you up. Lucas felt every muscle in his body tense. What do you mean? Rodney sat down on a pile of lumber, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. We told you it was because we were young and scared and racist. That was all true. But there was more. The hammer felt heavy in Lucas's hand. More what? The doctor told us something that day. Something we never put in any of the paperwork. Something we never told anyone. Rodney's hands were shaking. He said you might have a genetic condition. Something that could affect your development, your health, your whole life. Lucas's world tilted. What kind of condition? He called it a chromosomal abnormality. Said it might cause developmental delays, learning disabilities, maybe heart problems. He said you might never be able to live independently, might need care your whole life. Rodney's voice cracked. We were kids ourselves, Lucas. 22 years old with no money, no health insurance, no idea how to care for a child with special needs. We thought if we gave you to a family who was prepared for that, who had resources. So you gave me away because you thought I was defective. The anger in Lucas's voice could have melted steel. No, we gave you away because we thought you deserved better than what we could give you. We thought you needed parents who could handle whatever challenges you might face. Lucas threw his hammer down so hard it left a dent in the subflooring. And did it ever occur to you to find out if the doctor was right? Did you ever think to get a second opinion before deciding my fate? Rodney's silence was answer enough. He was wrong, wasn't he? Lucas continued, his voice getting louder. 26 years later, here I am, college-educated, successful business owner, father of 2 healthy children. Whatever this doctor thought he saw, he was wrong. I know that now, Rodney whispered. I've known it for years. I've followed your life, Lucas. I know you became everything we were afraid you might not be able to become. Lucas paced the length of the house frame, trying to process this new information. All these years, he'd thought they'd rejected him purely because of race. But they'd also been told he might be disabled, might need more care than they could provide. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it added a layer of complexity that made his anger feel more complicated. What was the condition supposed to be? He asked finally. The doctor used a lot of big words. Something about extra genetic material on chromosome 21. He said it was common in babies born to older mothers, but sometimes happened randomly. Rodney looked up at Lucas. He said you had the physical markers. Lucas froze. Chromosome 21. He knew what that meant. Down syndrome. He thought I had Down syndrome. Yes, but I don't. No, you don't. The doctor was wrong. Or maybe the tests were wrong. I don't know how these things work. Lucas sat down heavily on the lumber pile next to Rodney. His entire understanding of his origin story was shifting. So you didn't just reject a black baby. You rejected a black baby who you thought was disabled. We were wrong on every level, Rodney said miserably. Wrong about what we could handle, wrong about what you needed, wrong about what kind of people we wanted to be. Did Rita know about the doctor's diagnosis? She was the one who insisted we find you a family who could give you proper care. She spent hours researching Down syndrome, reading about therapies and interventions. She wanted to make sure wherever you went, you'd have everything you needed. The irony was almost too much to bear. They'd given him up out of love, twisted, fearful love, but love nonetheless. They'd thought they were saving him from a life of inadequate care. My adoptive parents, Lucas said slowly. They knew. They knew about the suspected condition when they took me. They did. They took me anyway. They said they'd love me no matter what, handle whatever came. And when it turned out the diagnosis was wrong, they never made me feel like I was lucky to be normal. They just loved me. Rodney was crying again. That's what we should have done. We should have said we'd love you no matter what. Lucas looked at the frame of the house they were building together. This shelter he was creating for two people who had failed him in the most fundamental way. But they'd failed him out of fear, not cruelty, out of ignorance, not malice. The social worker, Lucas said suddenly. She told me you cried for hours after signing the papers. She said you kept asking if there was a mistake. Rita cried for 3 days straight. I had to take her to the hospital because she wouldn't stop. The nurses said it was normal, that mothers who give up babies often go through a grieving process. But it wasn't grief, Lucas. It was regret. The moment we signed those papers, we knew we'd made the wrong choice. Then why didn't you change your minds? You had time. The adoption wasn't final for weeks. Rodney was quiet for so long, Lucas thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke. Because we thought it would be selfish to take you back. We thought we'd already put you through enough, that changing our minds again would just hurt you more. We thought the kindest thing we could do was disappear from your life completely. As the sun began to set over their construction site, Lucas realized they weren't just building a house. They were excavating the truth, layer by layer, beam by beam. And with each revelation, the foundation of his anger was shifting. But the biggest shock was still coming. Tomorrow, when Rita would have one of her clear days and tell him the secret she'd been keeping for 26 years. A secret that would explain why she'd never had another child, and why Rodney had spent decades wondering if giving Lucas away had been the worst mistake of their lives or the most necessary sacrifice. The next morning, Lucas arrived at the construction site to find Rita sitting alone on a folding chair, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft pastels. She looked clear-eyed and present in a way he hadn't seen since meeting her. Rodney was nowhere to be seen. He went to town for supplies, Rita said without turning around. I asked him to give us some time alone. I have something to tell you, and I needed to wait for a day when my mind was working properly. Lucas sat down on a sawbuck beside her, noting how she held her hands folded in her lap to keep them from trembling, a trick his adoptive grandmother had used when her Parkinson's progressed. Rodney told you about the doctor's diagnosis, Rita continued, about why we thought we couldn't keep you. He did, but he didn't tell you the whole truth, because he doesn't know the whole truth. Rita turned to face Lucas for the first time, and he saw something in her eyes that looked like relief. I need to tell you something I've never told anyone, not even Rodney. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. What? The doctor was wrong about you having Down syndrome. But he wasn't wrong about there being a genetic condition in our family. Rita's voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her nervousness. 3 months after you were born, I went for a follow-up appointment. The same doctor who'd examined you. I asked him to run genetic tests on me and Rodney. Why? Because I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened, why you'd been born with what they thought were markers for Down syndrome. Rita looked out at the half-built house. The tests showed that I carry a genetic variation, not Down syndrome, but something called a balanced translocation. It means I have a higher chance of having babies with chromosomal abnormalities. Lucas tried to process this information. So the doctor wasn't completely wrong. He was wrong about you. You were perfectly healthy. But he was right that there was an increased risk. The variation I carry, it can cause miscarriages, stillbirths, or babies born with serious developmental delays. Rita's voice broke slightly. The doctor said if Rodney and I tried to have more children, we had about a 50% chance of losing them or having them born with severe disabilities. Is that why you never had other kids? Rita nodded. We tried for 2 years after giving you up. I had 4 miscarriages. The last one was at 6 months. Tears began streaming down her face. "We lost a daughter, Lucas. We named her Dorothy. She would have been your little sister." Lucas felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. "Rita, I'm so sorry." "After Dorothy, the doctors told us we should stop trying. The pregnancy losses were getting dangerous for me, so we stopped." Rita wiped her eyes with a tissue she pulled from her pocket. "But the worst part was knowing that we'd given away our healthy child because we were afraid, and then lost the children we tried to keep." They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of this revelation settling between them. "Does Rodney know about the genetic testing?" Lucas asked. "He knows about the miscarriages. He held me through every one of them. But he doesn't know about the genetic variation because I never told him." Rita looked at Lucas with an expression that was part confession, part plea. "I couldn't bear to tell him that our decision to give you up had been based on real medical risk, because then he might think we were right to do it." "But you weren't right," Lucas said gently. "Even if there was a risk, even if the tests showed a genetic variation, I was healthy. I didn't need to be given away. I know that now. I've known it for 26 years. Every day I wake up knowing that we gave away our perfectly healthy son because we were too afraid to take a chance, too young to understand that love means accepting whatever comes." Rita turned to face him fully. "But Lucas, I need you to understand something else. The reason I never told Rodney about the genetic testing is because I've spent 26 years carrying a different kind of guilt." "What do you mean?" "I think part of me was relieved when the doctor said you might have Down syndrome. Not because I didn't want a disabled child, but because it gave us a reason to give you up that felt less terrible than the truth." Lucas felt something cold settle in his chest. "What truth?" Rita took a shaky breath. "The truth that we were terrified of raising a black child in a town like Millbrook. The truth that we didn't know how to protect you from the racism you'd face, or how to teach you about a culture we didn't understand. The truth that we were selfish and scared, and unprepared for anything that challenged our narrow view of the world." She stood up and walked to the house frame, running her hand along one of the studs Lucas had installed. When the doctor mentioned the possible genetic condition, it felt like permission to do what we were already afraid we wanted to do. And I've hated myself for that every day since. Lucas joined her at the frame. "So giving me up wasn't just about the Down syndrome diagnosis, and it wasn't just about race. It was about both. Yes, and it was about us being too young and too cowardly to rise to the challenge of loving you the way you deserved to be loved." Rita's voice was barely a whisper. "We took the easy way out, and we called it sacrifice." "Why are you telling me this now?" Rita looked at him with eyes that held decades of pain. "Because you deserve the complete truth. Because I'm running out of time to tell it. And because watching you build this house for us, seeing the man you became despite what we did, I realize that you have something Rodney and I never learned." "What's that?" "Courage. Real courage. The kind that chooses love when it's hard, that builds something beautiful for people who hurt you, that takes risks because the alternative is living a smaller life." Rita touched the frame again. "This house you're building, you're not doing it because we deserve it. You're doing it because you're the kind of person who builds houses for people who need them, even when those people are the ones who failed you most." Lucas felt tears burning his eyes. "I learned that from my real parents. The Bakers taught me that family isn't about biology. It's about choosing to love someone every day, even when they're difficult, even when they disappoint you." They sound like remarkable people. They are. They saved me from becoming bitter. They taught me that I could choose who I wanted to be instead of letting my circumstances choose for me. Rita nodded. "I wish we could have been that kind of people for you. I wish we could have chosen love over fear." They stood together in the skeleton of the house, surrounded by the evidence of Lucas's choice to build rather than destroy, to create rather than abandon. "There's something else," Rita said after a long moment. "Something I need to ask you." "What?" "Will you let me tell you about the nursery we prepared for you? Will you let me tell you about the dreams we had before fear took over?" Lucas hesitated. Part of him didn't want to hear about their preparation, their excitement, their plans. It would make their abandonment feel even more painful. But another part of him, the part that had been building this house, needed to hear it. "Okay," he said. Rita's face lit up with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "We painted the room yellow because we didn't know if you were going to be a boy or girl. Rodney built a crib by hand. He worked on it for months, sanding every piece until it was smooth as silk. I embroidered blankets with little teddy bears. We had names picked out. Michael for a boy, Michelle for a girl." "Michael," Lucas repeated. "That's close to Lucas. Your adoptive parents chose well." Rita smiled through her tears. "We had books ready to read to you, toys picked out. College funds started. We were so excited, Lucas. We loved you before you were born. We loved you the moment they placed you in our arms. But not enough to keep me. No, not enough to be brave. Not enough to trust that love could overcome fear." Rita reached out tentatively and touched Lucas's arm. "But I want you to know that giving you up broke us. We never recovered from it. Every choice we made after that was colored by regret." As if summoned by their conversation, Rodney's truck pulled up to the site. He climbed out with a load of roofing materials, took one look at Rita's tear-streaked face and Lucas's stunned expression, and knew that the last secret had finally been told. What he didn't know was that Lucas had already made his decision about forgiveness, and that decision was about to change all of their lives in ways none of them could imagine. 6 months later, Lucas stood in the doorway of the completed house, watching Rita arrange flowers in a vase on the kitchen table, while Rodney hung a picture frame on the living room wall. The house was small but perfect, 1,000 square feet of safety, dignity, and hope. The walls were painted in warm colors that Rita had chosen during one of her good days. The bathroom had grab bars and a walk-in shower that would accommodate her increasing mobility issues. Rodney's woodworking tools had a place of honor in the garage workshop that Lucas had insisted on adding to the original plans. But the most remarkable thing about the house wasn't its construction. It was the family portrait hanging above the fireplace. "Are you sure about this?" Dorothy had asked when Lucas first brought Rodney and Rita to Chicago to meet his family. "Are you sure you're ready for the kids to know about them?" Lucas had been sure, not because he'd forgiven Rodney and Rita. Forgiveness, he'd learned, was an ongoing process, not a destination. But because he'd decided that his children deserved to understand the full complexity of family, love, and second chances. Clarice and Todd had approached their biological grandparents with the fearless curiosity of children. Clarice had immediately started asking Rita about what Lucas was like as a baby, seemingly unbothered by the fact that Rita hadn't been there to see it. Todd had gravitated toward Rodney, fascinated by his stories about building things and fixing broken objects. "Grandpa Rodney says he taught you how to use tools," Todd had announced to Lucas during that first visit. "But you said Grandpa Joe taught you that." "Both of them did," Lucas had replied, surprised by how true that felt. "Sometimes we learn the same things from different people." The portrait showed all of them, Lucas and Dorothy with their children, Nadia and David Baker, whom everyone called Grandma and Grandpa, and Rodney and Rita, who had earned the titles Grandpa Bob and Grandma Lynn. It wasn't a traditional family, but it was theirs. "The social worker called today," Rodney said, interrupting Lucas's thoughts. He was hanging the picture with the careful precision of someone who'd spent his life making sure things were level and secure. "She said the paperwork is all approved." Lucas nodded. They'd been working for months to establish legal guardianship arrangements that would ensure Rita received proper care as her dementia progressed. It was complicated. Rodney was her husband, but his own health was declining. Lucas had no legal relationship to either of them, but he'd become their primary support system. The solution they'd worked out was unprecedented but practical. Rodney would remain Rita's primary guardian, but Lucas would be appointed as backup guardian and healthcare proxy. When the time came, and everyone knew it was coming, Lucas would make sure Rita received the care she needed. "There's something else," Rodney continued, his voice careful. "Something I need to ask you." "What?" Rodney set down his hammer and turned to face Lucas fully. "The doctor says Rita probably has 2, Maybe 3 good years left before the dementia takes over completely. And my diabetes. Well, the medication isn't working as well as it used to. Lucas felt his chest tighten. He'd known this conversation was coming, but that didn't make it easier. I need to know that you'll take care of her when I can't, Rodney said. Not because you owe us anything. We know you don't. But because you're the only family she has left, and because I think she needs to know that the son she gave away grew up to be the kind of man who takes care of people. Before Lucas could answer, Rita appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. She was having a good day. Her eyes were clear, and she moved with purpose rather than confusion. "Are you two talking about me?" she asked with a smile that reminded Lucas painfully of his own mother's expression when she was teasing him. "Rodney's asking me to promise I'll take care of you when he can't," Lucas said honestly. They'd learned that directness worked better than euphemisms when Rita was lucid. Rita walked over and sat down in the recliner that Lucas had positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun through the east-facing window. "And what did you tell him?" "I haven't answered yet." Rita studied his face with the intensity of someone who knew her time for clear thinking was limited. "You know, I've been thinking about that nursery I told you about, the one we prepared before you were born." "What about it?" "I kept everything. For 26 years I kept every piece of that nursery in boxes in our attic. The yellow paint, the handmade crib, the teddy bear blankets, even the college fund, though there's not much left of that now." Rita's voice was steady, matter of fact. "When the house burned down, I lost it all. And you know what I felt?" Lucas shook his head. "Relief. For the first time in 26 years, I felt relief about something connected to you." Rita leaned forward in her chair. "Because I realized I'd been keeping those things like evidence of our love for you, when the real evidence of our love should have been keeping you. Rita, let me finish. I'm having a good day, and I need to say this while I can." She looked at Rodney, then back at Lucas. "We don't deserve your care. We don't deserve your forgiveness. We don't deserve to have you in our lives at all. But you've given us all of those things anyway, not because of who we are, but because of who you are." Lucas felt tears burning his eyes. "I'm not perfect, Rita. I still get angry sometimes. I still wonder what my life would have been like if you'd kept me. Of course you do. And you should. What we did was wrong, and the consequences of that wrongness don't disappear just because we're sorry." Rita reached out and took his hand. "But Lucas, the most remarkable thing about you isn't that you became successful despite being given away. It's that you became the kind of person who builds houses for people who hurt you." Rodney had tears streaming down his face. "She's right. You didn't just build us a house, son. You built us a chance to be better people, a chance to love you the way we should have from the beginning." Lucas looked around the room, at the house he'd built with his own hands, at the people who had given him life but not love, who had failed him but were now part of his family in ways none of them had expected. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I'll take care of both of you. Not because you're my biological parents, but because you're Clarice and Todd's grandparents now. Because you're part of my family, messy and complicated as that is." Rodney broke down completely, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Rita squeezed Lucas's hand tighter. "There's one more thing," Lucas said. "I want to ask you both something." They looked at him expectantly. "I want you to come to Clarice's birthday party next month, and Todd's soccer games, and family dinners on Sundays." Lucas took a deep breath. "I want you to be the grandparents you never got to be parents. I want my children to know that families can be broken and rebuilt, that love can survive even the worst mistakes." Rita started crying then, not the desperate tears of regret she'd cried before, but tears of joy and wonder. "You'd really want that? I want that. Dorothy wants that. The kids want that." Lucas smiled through his own tears. "And I think Mom and Dad, the Bakers, they want that too. They've always said that love multiplies. It doesn't divide. There's room in our family for all the people who choose to love us." As the sun set through the windows of the house that love had built, 3 generations of a family that had been broken and rebuilt sat together in the living room. Rodney told stories about his hardware store. Rita shared memories from her teaching days. Lucas talked about his latest construction projects and Clarice's upcoming school play. It wasn't the family any of them had planned. It wasn't the family Lucas had been born into, or the family Rodney and Rita had dreamed of. But it was the family they had chosen to become. Imperfect, complicated, built on a foundation of forgiveness, and held together by the revolutionary idea that it's never too late to choose love over fear. And in the end, that was the most important thing Lucas had learned how to build. Not just houses made of wood and nails, but a home made of second chances, open hearts, and the courage to believe that every family, no matter how broken, can be rebuilt with enough love, patience, and hope. The house that love built would shelter more than just Rodney and Rita. It would shelter the truth that redemption is always possible, that families can be chosen as well as given, and that sometimes the most beautiful homes are the ones built by hands that have known both rejection and acceptance, and choose to create rather than destroy. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story wasn't just about a house. It was about rebuilding what fear once destroyed. If it moved you, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you